At the cocktail party on the third deck of the Atlantis Dream, wealthy passengers raised their glasses, all laughing about one topic, the old turtle Frank Miller from the pool deck. Yesterday I asked him to do a diving demonstration. He nearly had a heart attack, a businessman narrated amid laughter. Other passengers mimicked how the 70-year-old swimming instructor slowly entered the pool and gave basic swimming lessons. Even Captain Johnson smiled. That night, when a Category 4 hurricane altered the ship's course and giant waves flooded the engine room, no one could have guessed that this old turtle was actually a legendary Navy SEAL who had commanded the most classified rescue operations, known by the codename Storm Hunter. Welcome to Best Honor Stories. Before we continue, tell us in the comments which city in the world you're watching this video from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button to help us preserve these valuable memories. Frank Miller had awakened before dawn, as he did every morning. Even after a 45-year military career, his body clock still worked at 5 a.m. He quietly dressed in his small staff cabin on the luxury cruise liner Atlantis Dream and went up to the deck. The sun hadn't yet appeared on the horizon, but the eastern sky had begun to lighten slightly. The pool area on the sixth deck was completely empty at this hour. Frank sat on the edge of the pool and dipped his legs in the water. His hands trembled slightly, a souvenir from the Gulf War. But this tremor didn't tell the story of a man who had directed rescue operations in the world's most dangerous waters for 30 years. "Up early again, Miller," a voice called from behind him. Frank turned his head. The ship's second captain, Eric Thompson, was walking toward him. "Old habits die hard, Captain," Frank said. Thompson laughed. "Don't ask me. I spent 10 years in the Coast Guard. I still wake up without setting an alarm." Frank nodded, but offered no details. In the early years of his retirement, he had made the mistake of talking about his past after a few drinks at a bar. Now he never mentioned his military background to anyone. His new life was simple, working as a swimming instructor on a luxury ship, enduring the insults of rich passengers, and quietly spending the rest of his life. "How does the weather look today?" Frank asked, sniffing the air. Thompson frowned. "Meteorology is a bit concerned. A Category 2 hurricane is forming, but they say it will stay away from our route." Frank's eyes focused on the distant horizon. With 30 years of maritime experience, he could sense the change in the smell of the air. "Let's hope they're right," was all he said. At 10 a.m., Frank was giving his first swimming lesson. His student was 8-year-old Timmy, son of technology company CEO Robert Blackwell. "Mr. Miller, my dad trained with Olympic swimmers. Not someone old like you," said the child before entering the pool. Frank just smiled. "Sometimes the best teachers aren't the fastest swimmers, Timmy." During the lesson, a group of passengers sitting by the pool watched Frank, whispering among themselves and laughing. Frank noticed this but ignored it. After 30 years in the Navy SEALs, ego was something he had left behind long ago. In the afternoon, as the sun warmed the sixth deck, Frank began his adult class. 4 women and 2 men, all owners of luxury cabins, wanted to learn basic swimming techniques, or at least that's how it appeared. "Mr. Miller," said one of the women, putting on goggles, "are you also an expert in diving? Could you give us a demonstration?" Frank smiled politely. "Today we'll just be working on basic swimming, ma'am." "Come on," said one of the men, James Hoffman, a famous Wall Street investment banker. "We want some entertainment. Give us a professional diving demonstration." Frank could hear the mockery in Hoffman's tone. "Diving isn't in our program, Mr. Hoffman. Now let's move on to backstroke." When the lesson ended, Hoffman and his friends stood by the pool, making jokes about Frank. "I bet he's never dived in his life," said Hoffman. "He probably just learned to swim recently." "I heard he's only here to supplement his retirement income," said one of the women. "He's not a real instructor." As Frank dried himself with a towel, he ignored these comments. At this stage of his life, he didn't care what others thought. In his 45-year military career, he had saved countless lives in the world's most dangerous waters. Now he just wanted peace. That evening at the captain's table dinner, Frank's name was again a topic of entertainment. "Captain Johnson, tell us," said Hoffman, raising his glass, "where did you find this old swimming instructor?" "From a retired sailor's bar." Captain Richard Johnson laughed politely. Frank came through a staffing agency. He has a maritime background, but I don't know the details. Maritime background, Hoffman repeated, laughing loudly. He probably worked on a fishing boat. Yesterday I told him to do a diving demonstration. He nearly had a heart attack. The wealthy passengers around the table roared with laughter. Some began to mimic Frank's slow movements and trembling hands. Frank was quietly eating his dinner in the staff dining hall, but he could hear the laughter from the upper deck. Young waitress Sophia, sitting beside him, looked uncomfortable. "You should ignore them, Mr. Miller," the girl said. "They're just spoiled rich people." Frank smiled. "Don't worry, Sophia. I stopped caring what people thought a long time ago." Late that night, as Frank was reading a book in his cabin, he looked out the window. The sky was dark, but lightning flashed on the western horizon. He could feel the change in air pressure. The hurricane Thompson had mentioned was closer than he had predicted. He picked up his phone and checked the ship's weather app. The storm that had started as a Category 2 hurricane was now upgraded to Category 4 and had changed course directly toward the Atlantis Dream's path. Just as Frank was about to call the bridge, Captain Johnson's voice came over the ship's speakers. "Dear passengers, may I have your attention, please? According to the latest information from our meteorological service, the hurricane developing in our region has intensified more rapidly than expected. As a safety precaution, we are changing our course and heading north to avoid the storm. There is no cause for concern, but we may experience some turbulence tonight. Please secure your valuables and remain in your cabins if necessary. Thank you." Frank calculated the ship's new route and the hurricane's path in his mind. If they moved quickly enough, they could escape the center of the hurricane. But he knew timing was critical. Toward midnight, the storm began to reach the Atlantis Dream. The ship was rocking in increasingly rough waves. Most passengers were in their cabins, but some still filled the bars, seeing the storm as an adventure. Frank couldn't sleep. His years as a Navy SEAL had sharpened his sense of danger. He put on his pants and waterproof jacket, then went up to the deck. The scene outside was frightening. Giant waves crashed against the sides of the ship. The wind howled, and rain fell horizontally. Frank made his way to the bridge despite the rain. Captain Johnson and the crew were in a panic. The navigation systems were still working, but the meteorological reports were getting worse. The center of the hurricane was moving faster than predicted. "We need to turn more northward," Thompson was saying. "With our current direction, we're heading straight into the center of the hurricane." "Engines are at full power," said Captain Johnson, with a worried voice. "We can't go any faster." Frank watched silently. He could understand the severity of the situation. It was now impossible for the ship to escape the center of the hurricane. Just then, a violent jolt was felt throughout the ship, followed by a dull explosion sound. "What was that?" Johnson asked, trying to maintain his balance. The ship's engineer reported over the communication system. "Captain, a large wave has damaged the lower part of the engine room. We're taking on water." Johnson's face paled. "How bad is it?" "Compartment 3 is completely underwater. Water pumps are working, but the wave pressure is too high. We can't pump the water out." Frank stepped forward. "Captain, can I help?" Johnson looked at him, eyebrows furrowed. "Frank, what are you doing here?" Frank hesitated. "I have some experience in maritime matters. Maybe I can help." Thompson intervened. Johnson thought for a brief moment, then nodded. "All right. Thompson, take Frank to the engine room." Frank and Thompson quickly descended to the engine room. The situation was terrifying. The lower deck was partially underwater, and the water level was rising. Engineers were trying to pump the water out, but the ship was listing more and more. "We need to assess the situation," said Frank, having to raise his voice. "I need to see the extent of the damage." "It's too dangerous," warned Chief Engineer Rodriguez. "The lower compartment is almost completely underwater." Frank shook his head. "We can't solve the problem without seeing the ship's structure." Thompson looked at him in surprise. You know ship engineering?" Frank took a deep breath. It was no longer time to hide his past. "I served for 30 years in the Navy's SEAL delivery vehicle team. I specialize in damaged submarine and ship rescue operations." Thompson's mouth fell open. "You, what?" "There's no time to explain," said Frank. "I need diving equipment. Now." The sudden change in Frank's authority surprised everyone who knew him. Forgetting his trembling hands and slow movements, Frank had transformed into a commanding, determined soldier. Rodriguez quickly brought a diving tank and mask. Frank checked the equipment and gave final instructions before entering the water. If the water level reaches a critical point, start evacuating the passengers. I'll stay in radio contact. Frank dove into the water. The lower deck was now completely underwater. He examined the damaged area with his flashlight. The situation was worse than he thought. There was a large tear in the hull, and water was rapidly flowing in. When he surfaced, he reported the situation. It's impossible to repair the damage, but we can slow the water flow. Get me welding equipment and metal plates. Within an hour, Frank and the engineers implemented a temporary solution. They partially covered the tier with metal plates, but the ship was still taking on water at a dangerous rate. It's not enough, said Frank, wiping his sweat. The main pumps are inadequate. We need to activate the backup systems. Rodriguez shook his head. The backup pump system is old and hasn't been used for years. I don't even know how to operate it. Frank took a deep breath. I do. A similar system was used in old-class submarines. Show me the way. The backup pump system was at the lowest level of the ship, in an area now completely underwater. Frank put on his diving gear again. Going alone is too dangerous, said Thompson. Take someone with you. Frank shook his head. This is a one-person job. When the system is activated, there will be pressure fluctuations. If anyone else is inside, it could be dangerous. Thompson's face showed concern. But Frank dove into the water and swam through dark corridors. The ship had begun to list dangerously, making it difficult to navigate. But years of training kicked in. He had worked on similar systems in submarines and could find his way even in the dark. When he reached the pump room, he saw that the system was old as expected, but this didn't stop him. He examined the system with the tools at hand, cleaned the worn connections, and activated the control panel. The system didn't work on the first attempt. Frank remained calm and methodically checked each component. The problem was a short circuit in the main power supply. Using a metal tool, he bypassed the connection and restarted the system. This time, the old pumps roared to life. The system began working, pumping water out of the ship. Frank reported over the radio. Thompson, backup pump system active. Water level should start dropping. Copy that, Frank, said Thompson's relieved voice. Checking now. As Frank was leaving the pump room, another violent jolt was felt throughout the ship. A corridor collapsed, blocking his escape route. Frank's oxygen supply was limited, and he needed to find an alternative path. With years of experience in underwater rescue operations, Frank visualized the ship's layout in his mind. He could go through a ventilation duct, but it would be risky. Still, there was no other option. He entered the narrow ventilation duct, and as he moved forward, he could hear the ship's structure dangerously straining. His oxygen was decreasing. Without panicking, he continued to move methodically. Just as his oxygen was about to run out, he saw a light. He had reached the end of the duct. With one final effort, he pushed himself out and emerged in the engine room. Thompson and the engineers greeted him. "My God, Frank," said Thompson, "we thought we'd lost you." Frank removed his oxygen mask and took a deep breath. "What's happening?" "The pump system is working," said Rodriguez in amazement. "The water level is dropping. You saved us." Frank stood up. "It's too early to celebrate. What's the status of the storm?" "We're still in it," said Thompson. "But if the ship's structural integrity holds, we can make it through." When they returned to the bridge, Captain Johnson and his assistants were monitoring the situation. The passengers were still in their cabins, most unaware of the severity of the situation. "Frank," said Johnson in shock, "Thompson told me. You were really a Navy SEAL?" Frank nodded. 30 years with DEVGRU. I specialized in underwater rescue operations. "Why didn't you tell us?" Johnson asked. Frank shrugged. "I thought that life was behind me. I just wanted to be a normal person." Just then, another violent jolt was felt throughout the ship. The navigation system shut down for a moment, then came back on. "We're in the center of the hurricane," said the navigation officer. "We're about to weather the worst part." Frank looked at the map. "We need to change our course. If we turn southeast, The current can carry us to the outer part of the hurricane. Johnson thought for a moment, then nodded. Change course. Southeast 150 degrees. For 2 hours, the Atlantis Dream battled the violent waters of the hurricane. Frank stayed on the bridge, giving advice to Johnson. Years of experience had given him the ability to understand storm patterns and ship maneuvers. As dawn broke, the ship finally began to emerge from the effects of the hurricane. The waves were still high, but no longer at a dangerous level. The crew breathed a sigh of relief. "What's the status of the ship?" Johnson asked. "The engine room is stabilized," said Rodriguez. "Pump systems are working. There's structural damage, but nothing critical." Johnson turned to Frank. "I don't know how to thank you without you." Frank raised his hand. "I was just doing my job, Captain." As the sun rose, passengers began to emerge from their cabins and come up to the deck. Most were only now realizing how dangerous the night had been. In the afternoon, Captain Johnson arranged a meeting in the ship's main hall. All passengers and crew were present. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Johnson, "last night we experienced a very serious situation. Our ship passed through the center of a Category 4 hurricane and sustained serious damage. Our engine room took on water, and for a while we faced the danger of sinking." Anxious murmurs rose in the hall. "However," Johnson continued, "thanks to the dedicated work of our crew and especially the extraordinary efforts of one person, we weathered the danger." Johnson called Frank to his side. Frank reluctantly stepped forward. "Mr. Frank Miller, our modest swimming instructor," said Johnson, smiling, "but also a 30-year veteran of the United States Navy's most elite rescue unit, DEVGRU. Commander Miller risked his life last night to stop the water flooding our ship and saved us all." Expressions of shock followed by applause rose in the hall. Frank bowed his head in embarrassment. Hoffman and the other wealthy passengers were shocked to learn the true identity of the man they had previously mocked. Hoffman stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, Commander Miller," he said, struggling to choose his words. We apologize for our behavior. If we had known—" Frank smiled slightly. "It's all right, Mr. Hoffman. Sometimes people only believe what they see." In the following days, the Atlantis Dream slowly made its way to the nearest port. Frank had now become the most respected person on the ship. Passengers wanted to talk to him, ask questions about his military career. Frank answered them all politely, but he was uncomfortable with the excessive attention. He had never wanted to be a hero. He had just done his job. When the ship reached the port, all passengers and crew gathered to bid Frank farewell. Captain Johnson presented him with a plaque from the ship. "Commander Miller, you saved this ship and everyone on it," said Johnson. "We will be forever grateful to you." Frank accepted the plaque and looked at the crowd. Hoffman and his friends were no longer mocking him. Now there was respect on their faces. "Thank you," Frank said simply. "But the real heroes are those who quietly do their duty every day and are never recognized. Sometimes the most valuable skills are hidden in the most unexpected people." A week later, Frank started a new assignment. The Navy had asked him to work as a consultant in their rescue diving training program, utilizing his experience. His retirement plans had changed, but Frank was happy about it. Perhaps the best contribution he could make was by sharing his knowledge and experience. As for the passengers of the Atlantis Dream, they never again judged people by their appearance, because they had learned that sometimes the most ordinary-looking people might have the most extraordinary stories. Thank you for watching Best Honor Stories. If this story touched you, share it, subscribe, and help these silent heroes' voices continue to be heard. We'll see you in the next story.